It's approximately 10 o'clock, and we are starting our meeting. Madam Clerk, would you call the meeting to order, please?
Calling the roll, Ms. Stevens.
Present.
Mr. Jones.
Here.
Ms. Simon. Ms. Simon is absent at the moment. Mr. Gallagher.
Here.
Ms. Baker. Here. We have a quorum. Also like the record to reflect that Councilman Miller is also in attendance.
Thank you for joining us, Mr. Miller. Is there any public comment?
Yes, Madam Chair, we have one person signed in, Lowe.
Good morning. Thank you.
Hey, good morning, everybody.
Good morning.
I'm very glad to be here. We finally have a meeting we can actually talk about issues face to face. We may argue, we may debate, but we are working for the ultimate goal is to make this county good for everybody. So now today I'm here to support Legal Aid Society of Greater Cleveland. They have been helping low-income people, homeless people a lot. But for years, I have found out there's one particular situation we do need county's help. Currently, right now, from what I've known, there's at least 120-something cases on homeless people having identity theft done by Frontline Service, the previous service provider of the Hale. However, in Ohio, cybercrimes, identity theft, this type of issues, we don't really have good legislation. On the other hand, our state house in Columbus only put out something to suppress people's First Amendment rights, U.S. Amendment rights, to have a protest, peaceful protest, and voting. So I wish our county council members can help us, just like the important thing you did previously, the anti-discrimination ordinance. If we can do something from this level to help people out on identity theft, cyber crimes, especially on low-income and homeless people, I would be really grateful for your effort. I would like to participate if you need my assistance, because this is really needed. Because this affects people, the ability to get housing, jobs, and any other things. Lots of people got stuck in the shelter or on the street because of these type of things. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Is there anyone else, Madam Clerk?
No, Madam Chair.
Thank you. We will move on then to approval of minutes from June 14th meeting. Has everyone had a chance to review those? If so, can I have a motion to approve? Thank you, ma'am.
Second.
Thank you. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Nay. Thank you. The minutes are approved. There have been no additional items referred to this committee, but there is an item I would like to have reviewed and discussed. Who's speaking first on behalf of the Legal Aid Society of Cleveland? I never can recognize people with their masks, so if you would step up to the podium. Thank you and welcome. I'll let you tell us who's with you here today and your roles, and then talk to us about something that I consider, as you know, I'm slightly biased on your behalf and your colleagues' behalf across the state. I believe that the Legal Aid Society of Cleveland, Community Legal Aid, as they are called in the two communities immediately to our south, they do good work, and they're attorneys with the white hats on. They're generally the good guys that most of us can depend on. And in this one, they bring us some additional information about how the support we're giving to people who have had problems throughout the pandemic with their incomes, dealing with landlords, and other items that are necessary to continue to provide a good quality of life. So in this role, you're almost a champion or a superhero. So welcome today to tell us and our community how we can help you better serve. Colleen?
Thank you. I'm Colleen Cotter. I'm the Executive Director of the Legal Aid Society of Cleveland, and thank you for having us here today. We're very excited to be here to give you an update on what we're doing to prevent evictions using funding made available by this body, by County Council. Thank you so much for that grant. So I'm here today representing the Legal Aid Society of Cleveland, but as you know, our eviction prevention work is a partnership between the Legal Aid Society of Cleveland and the United Way of Greater Cleveland. My counterpart at United Way, Augie Napoli, is on a well-deserved vacation, so I stand in his stead, and he sends his greetings and thank you for the support also. I'm going to step back and let the details of this be described by my colleagues, Hazel Remish, who is a supervising attorney at Legal Aid, and Andrew from United Way, Vice President of Programs. But first, let me just set the stage. As I said, we have received this grant from the county, which is very timely. You all no doubt know that at the end of this month, the CDC moratorium is ending, which means that we have been preparing for a significant increase in eviction filings throughout the county. So when we received the grant from the county, we immediately began working with all of the municipal courts throughout the county to talk about how can we together devise an effective, efficient system to make sure tenants' voices are heard and that their rights are protected as they face evictions. We've been working very closely with our partner CHN Housing Partners, who the county also provided funding from the same source. We work hand in glove. The rental assistance and representation are required to be both in place in order for us to really effectively prevent eviction. And we've also begun representing tenants. So we're here today for two reasons. One is to give you an update about this program and what we've done to ramp up our representation of tenants, and then also to ask for your help. We need your help in the community, as leaders in the community, to get the word out. Too often, before the pandemic, 50% of tenants defaulted, just didn't show up. And at the Legal Aid Society, we think that is in large part because people do not feel they have a voice. Showing up in court without a lawyer is scary. Sometimes showing up in court as a lawyer is scary. So we need to empower people, let them know they do have a voice, they do have rights. We are here to enforce their rights, but we need your help in getting that word out. So we're going to give you the tools to do that for us today, and we're happy to answer any questions. But I want to turn it over to Hazel Remish and Andrew Katusin.
So I'm Hazel Remish. I'm one of the supervising attorneys at Legal Aid. And Andrew, if you want to introduce yourself.
Hi, good morning, everybody. My name is Andrew Katusin, and I'm the Vice President of Community Investment at United Way.
And I think before we get started with giving you all the information about what we're doing with the grant, thank you, first of all, for that support. And, we really believe it's going to have a huge impact in the communities in the county. But, everyone is familiar with Miranda rights at some point, whether it's, oh, sorry, is that better? So everyone is familiar with Miranda rights, whether it's through crime shows or you learned it at school, you have the right to an attorney. If you can't afford an attorney, one will be appointed to you. But Miranda really only applies in criminal cases. You don't have the right to an attorney in a civil case. And so when you hear Colleen speaking about going into court, tenants going into court on their own and how scary that can be, that is a reality that people experience daily in our community. Because there isn't the right to an attorney when you're facing eviction, even though it's a basic human need. Even though losing your housing can have a detrimental impact on our communities, it has an impact on children missing school more often. Homeless shelters are utilized more often when people have face housing instability. The folks that go through eviction generally will move more often, which means that our communities are less stable, our neighborhoods are less stable. And there's a disproportionate impact in both women and a population of color is disproportionately impacted when an eviction is faced in those communities. And so really, there's a lot of impact that happens from when an eviction, happens, and a lot of trauma that the families face as a result of that. And so I just wanted to, point that out before we get started, because that is the reason why this work is so important and why this grant is so important to our community.
Thank you. So we're just going to start briefly. The initiative launched, at July 1st of 2020 in the city of Cleveland. And so we just want to give you a really brief overview of what we've been able to accomplish since then. So I'll start with that first column that you see on your left. And so in that time, and this is as of January, we update this report every 6 months or so, 323 cases have been closed. Over 1,600 tenants have been informed of their right. We have shared 3,000 informational letters, and we share those using court records, so we know that they're getting directly into the hands of folks that have an active eviction filed against them so that they're aware of their possible right. And we've also built a website so that there's also that online digital access for folks, be it via a laptop or a tablet, or it is also mobile friendly. And we've had more than 2,000 folks visit that website since July 1st. In addition, we've partnered with local grassroots organizations who've knocked on nearly 600 doors, again, using those court eviction filings so we know that we're being targeted in our outreach. And of those folks that they spoke with, 32% were aware of Right to Counsel, or the program specifically in Cleveland, and 41% were aware of the rental assistance, again, graciously provided by this body to CHN Housing Partners. And so with that, sort of those outputs, I'm going to turn it back over to Hazel to talk about the impact.
Yeah, and so the statistics that you see on this particular slide are statistics that are specific to the Right to Counsel in Cleveland. So in 2019, Cleveland became the fourth city, just the fourth city in the country. There's been other cities since then, but the first in the Midwest to launch a right to counsel for tenants who are facing eviction. So the statistics on this particular page are really just to illustrate the success that we've had and what we anticipate we will have in the whole county with this grant that this body has provided. So of the cases that we closed in the first 6 months, 93% of legal aid clients that were seeking to avoid an eviction or involuntary displacement were able to achieve that. That's huge. 93% of the clients that we represented were stably housed at the end of that case because of our work. 83% of legal aid clients that were seeking more than 30 days to move were able to achieve that as well. And 89% of legal aid clients that were seeking to mitigate their damages were able to achieve that. So that means that, whatever they owed at the end of that case was less because of our representation. 700 children under the age of 18 were impacted by the right to counsel in Cleveland. And 133 of those 700 children were able to avoid the trauma of eviction. Now, we're going to talk about outcomes for some of the closed cases that we've seen this year. So the previous slide was the first 6 months of the program. Since then, we've continued to track our outcomes, and 91% of legal aid clients avoided eviction. So same, you kind of see the trends and the statistics changing, but we just wanted to illustrate, what we anticipate. 88% of legal aid clients seeking more time to move were able to achieve that. 97% of clients mitigated their damages, and 100% of tenants who needed rental assistance were able to do so because of our representation. And 331 households received legal representation and avoided the trauma of eviction. Now, what does legal representation look like? So most of the time, if a tenant does not have an attorney, they don't realize that they may have a defense to the eviction. They don't realize that they might be able to advocate for that additional time so that their stuff isn't placed on the tree lawn when they're evicted. They don't realize that, there might be rent assistance that's available to them. And so really, when an attorney steps in, it's defending against the eviction. Oftentimes, there might be a defense. It's facilitating access to the court via technology. So a lot of courts are still operating virtually via Zoom or some other sort of platform. And oftentimes we know that there's a digital divide and that tenants don't always have access to the internet in order to attend and appear for their hearings. So it's facilitating that process. It's filing counterclaims where appropriate. So oftentimes, tenants will have complaints about, I didn't pay my rent because there's conditions in my unit, because there's water leaking, or there's issues with, you name it. And they don't realize that having withheld the rent is not right, but also that they might have counterclaims against that landlord because of those conditions. And so oftentimes it includes filing filing counterclaims, seeking the repair of those poor housing conditions. It has an overall impact on making sure that our housing stock is safe and habitable for our population. Facilitating rental assistance applications. So we work very, very closely with CHN Housing Partners and any other organization who has rent assistance in order to ensure that that process is manageable for tenants. So a lot of times there's a lot of paperwork that is required in order for a tenant to access that rent assistance. And so facilitating that and ensuring that, if somebody, for example, doesn't have a birth certificate and they have to submit it. So making sure that tenants are aware of what the requirements are, and then also working with landlords to ensure that they are aware of what they need to provide in order to get the rent assistance. So really working with those organizations collaboratively. And then at Legal Aid, we also have a social work department. And so a lot of times, if we identify other issues, we try to address the tenant's situation in a more collaborative way, ensuring that we're addressing not just the housing issue, but if there are other issues that they need help with. And so we will make a warm referral to our social work department, or if there are other legal issues that we might be able to help them with, we'll make those referrals as well. And so really what we know is that free eviction help really ensures access to rental assistance. It really increases housing stability, which really leads to better employment, education, health for our communities. And it makes sure that landlords can stay in business, that that they can pay their property taxes, that they can maintain their properties. And in this slide, we have a quote actually from a landlord who really reached out to us and said, that they were worried when a legal aid attorney stepped in, thinking that the process was going to take longer, but their experience really was a positive one. And they quote, "Not only did the legal aid attorney represent my tenant, but she was able to help me get the funding I needed to be able to keep this property." That is a quote from a landlord who we helped both. We represented the tenant, but we made sure that the landlord also understood that there was rent assistance available and what the parameters for that was. And so, Colleen alluded to this already, but July 31st is going to be the end of the CDC moratorium. That has given tenants and landlords both the ability to sort of put a pause on evictions, to say, okay, let's see if there's rent assistance that's available. Let's go through that process. But that's ending, and that has afforded a protection that is going to be lifted, and it's going to create a lot of chaos and a lot of evictions that we expect will be filed. The eviction process is meant to be speedy. It goes by really, really quickly. And so a lot of times the rental application process doesn't catch up to that. And so we expect that there will be a flood of evictions, when the moratorium is lifted.
Thank you. And there are just two things I'd like to add. One of the reasons that United Way is so passionate and decided to be a great partner with Legal Aid is that really housing instability and eviction impacts all the other investments that we make as an organization and that we make as a community. So if you think about the fact that evictions can lead to homelessness, well, United Way has historically invested in homeless services, as does the county through the Office of Homeless Services. It also impacts employment. So thinking about job and family services, how does this program not only stabilize housing, not only stabilize that community, but how does it impact investments that the county makes, that this body makes, as it does, the impact that it has on investments that United Way has made. So just thinking about the ripple sort of impacts of this one intervention and what it can do for the community. And one other thing to just add, as I've been getting to know this, I'm a social worker, not a lawyer, so this has all been very new from a legal perspective to me. Now, I drive around, whether it's going to work or whatever the case may be, and you see items out on the sidewalk or on the tree lawn. And my question after being involved with this is it bulk week or is that someone's life that is now on the tree lawn? I know when bulk week is in my neighborhood, but if I'm outside my neighborhood, that is always a question that strikes me. Is that someone's life that I'm seeing on the sidewalk now? And I think that to what Hazel alluded to, the impact of preventing that trauma for an individual or for a family or for a child. Seeing that is just really powerful. So with that, we need your help. As I mentioned, folks are aware of this opportunity, but there's always an opportunity to make sure that more folks are aware. So anything that you can do to help us spread the word, to help us engage with other partners that can also spread the word, the service is only as good as the amount of people that know about it. And so we are always actively seeking ways to make sure that everybody that might be eligible or everybody that might benefit is aware of this resource in the community. In addition, the more resources a program has, the more folks it's able to impact, and then thinking again about those ripple effects and how it impacts other investments and protects those other investments in our community. Transformational funding will have that return on investment, and one of the things that we're doing is evaluating the impact. And so we're working with Stout, an evaluator that has evaluated this work in other cities across the nation, so they're very, very familiar with this movement, to make sure that what we're doing in our community is just as effective, to make sure that we are being efficient and impactful with the work that we're doing. The last piece is creating that path to a right to counsel. It's great to have available resources to provide those services, but to understand that somebody has a right just increases the impact and therefore the accountability that we as a community have in supporting those that are most vulnerable among us. And so now I'm going to share with you a little bit about the outreach that we've been doing. So, we mentioned those 3,000 pieces of literature that have gone out based on court eviction filing records. Here is an example of one of them. You'll see that it is translated into multiple languages to make sure that it is engaging. And this has historically gone in the summons itself, so that as soon as somebody gets that summons, they open it and they see that there is a resource out there that they may be able to benefit from to protect and stabilize their housing. And this has been the most effective form of outreach. This is where the vast majority of folks that are reaching out for services to legal aid, what they're identifying is how they found out. This is a follow-up letter, so we want to make sure that, beyond the summons insert, that there is an additional follow-up piece, just in case somebody doesn't, open that mail or, it's a very overwhelming piece of mail to get. So we want to make sure that there is follow-up. And as we're working throughout the county, you'll see that there are 7 courts or 7 municipalities listed there that are actively engaging and sharing and providing this literature. I mentioned that they're, getting the word out is where we need your help. We would love to be able to provide additional support in other communities throughout the county as well, and ensuring that the cases that come before them are aware of this service. And so we'd love help engaging with Lakewood, Lyndhurst, Bedford, Berea, and Parma to make sure that the citizens that are coming before them are aware of this right as well. And I believe one of the last pieces I'll share is this is just a screenshot of the website. So if you're curious, please visit freeevictionhelp.org. That's the plug. And you will see that website has a direct link so that folks can begin to apply. You'll see that right there on the screen. But it also has connections to a lot of different community resources like United Way's 211 Help Link that also provides referral services and can connect folks to rental assistance. It also has access to CHN so that folks can begin, as Hazel mentioned, some of those application processes for rental assistance, as well as a vast other array of services, because we know that oftentimes folks don't present with any one sole issue. There are lots of different things going on. People's lives are complex, and so we know that the needs and supports that they need are often complex as well. So with that, I will turn it back over to Hazel.
Yeah, and so just, I mentioned that Cleveland did pass an ordinance, and it became effective July 1st, 2020, which was timely given the pandemic and, everything going on in our community. So on this slide, it's really just illustrating what Cleveland has done. And we acknowledge that this funding obviously doesn't cover Cleveland, but it is an example of what the ordinance looks like. The right in Cleveland is narrow, so it is for families who have a child in the household and that are at 100% of the federal poverty guidelines, which is about $21,000 for a family of 3. So very low income population that's being impacted by this work in Cleveland. But it is a right, and that matters because when we're really talking about a right to counsel, we're talking about preventative legal medicine. We're really talking about empowering a population that has generally been marginalized and disenfranchised, and they don't believe in the system, and they're afraid of the system. And so we're really talking, that's why being a right matters. It also matters because it has a systemic impact. It changes the way the system has operated. And so that's, with that, I'm going to end, but that's why we put this slide up there, just so that you all, can see what Cleveland has done, and that has led some of the work that we've been doing here. But we really thank you for the opportunity to be here, and we really thank you for your support. It's going to have a great impact on our community. And with that, I think we'll open for questions if there are any. And Colleen?
Excuse me, Madam Chair, can you turn your microphone on?
Your microphone, sure.
I heard you say Hazel or Andrew. And Andrew, what was your last name?
Tucson.
Okay, I'll butcher it, but there were 4 or 5 communities that you wanted to reach out to: Lakewood, Parma, Bedford, and that was only 3 of them.
Berea and Lyndhurst.
Okay. And I believe somebody at this table, or a couple of someones at this table, may represent some of those folks. So tell us, is there a way for us as council members, because as you know, most of our districts have some portion of Cleveland, but a balance is suburban. So every council person has some folks who are working poor, middle class, and occasionally a few of us have some wealthier individuals in our communities. Help us understand concisely what is the pitch we can make in our communities.
So I would say the biggest, the most important thing is for people to understand that there is an option. When you're served with an eviction notice, you do not have to move. You have a right to present your case in court, and legal aid can help you. So the really short one is go to freeevictionhelp.org and apply for services with legal aid, because we may be able to prevent that eviction, or at the very least prevent that situation that Andrew described of having your life on the tree lawn.
I'd like to ask my colleagues if they have any questions. Mr. Miller, I see your hand.
So the 5 communities that you mentioned, why in particular are you interested in outreach in these communities?
So we have reached out to all of the municipal courts in the county. We've been, as you know, working directly with the Cleveland Housing Court for some time, but we reached out to all of the municipal courts and have asked a few things of them, asked them to put the flyer in the summons, asked them to provide us with a spreadsheet with the folks who are facing eviction so we can send the follow-up letter. All of the things that we know have been working and getting people to us in Cleveland, we wanted to replicate throughout the county. Those courts in particular have not yet signed on to partnering with us in that way. So all of the courts have gotten the same invitation, and not all of them have yet taken us up on it.
So I would mention that with Lakewood, they're in the process of electing a new judge of that court after a long stretch. And so if you're not able to do it under the current administration, hopefully under the next one, so that might provide another option.
Absolutely, and we're not giving up with anybody. As I said, we think of it as not yet.
And I know that Cleveland has the right to counsel, and I presume none of the other suburban communities have similar legislation. Is that correct?
That is correct. Cleveland is the only city in the state that has a right to counsel.
And can you give us a sense of what the differences are in terms of what services are available in Cleveland as opposed to the rest of the county because of that law being in Cleveland and not being present elsewhere?
I can. Before right to counsel, 1 to 2% of tenants were represented when they were faced with eviction. Now, with right to counsel, 22% of tenants in Cleveland are represented. About a third of tenants in Cleveland are eligible for the right to counsel program. As Hazel described it, it's a pretty narrow application. So we're really penetrating that about 75% of folks who are eligible are getting representation. In the rest of the county, without right to counsel and before this additional funding from the county, 1 to 2% of tenants were represented. And so with the combination of right to counsel and funding, the number of people who are represented goes up incredibly, and the outcome of that also is impacted. Without a lawyer, odds are you're evicted. With legal aid, odds are you're not. It's that simple.
So, do you have resources to represent people outside of Cleveland at this time?
We do have resources to represent tenants outside of Cleveland with the $1 million grant that county has awarded to legal aid specifically to represent tenants outside of Cleveland to sort of balance that. This doesn't come with a right to counsel, but it does come with resources. And so we have hired more lawyers, and we will be in all of those courts representing tenants.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thanks for all your good work.
Thank you, and thank you for the work that you do. It's really amazing. Just a couple technical questions. Are the restrictions the same with the dollars that you receive from the county as far as the requirements that you've stated here for, I believe, Cleveland?
No, the county does not have that limitation of families with children at 100%. That in part was, it's just, it's the way the ordinance was written, and really it's a way to try to have impact in those particular, there was a lot of initiatives going on in the city to support families, so this was one of those, but it's very narrow, and it only captures a small population. That is not the case in the rest of the county. We're representing folks at 200% of the federal poverty guideline, and then actually giving, also helping folks at 80% AMI with the grant that the county has provided.
Okay, good. And do you see, I know the pandemic just devastated many people, especially working class people, and now that we're coming out of this pandemic and this extends until, I believe, to the end of this year, what do you see in 2022? Do you see people able to get back to the life they had perhaps in 2019 that enabled them to be able to not need this assistance, or perhaps partial?
So, if I could predict 2022 in terms of the economy and the impact on working people, it's above my pay grade for sure. But I will say that before the pandemic, there were almost 20,000 evictions every year in Cuyahoga County, about half of those in the city of Cleveland and half of those in the suburbs. So even if we go back to the before times, there are 20,000 people evicted, faced with eviction every year. So the problem does not go away once we are no longer wearing masks, knock on wood, that we will get to that point. The problem doesn't go away. Hopefully it gets better. I mean, I would hope that it, we'll see I think we'll see a spike. Hopefully it will decrease, but this is an ongoing problem even without the pandemic.
May. So the 20,000, how does that compare to 2021? I mean, how does that compare to this year? How does 20,000, what does that number look like if that's your base of what you can expect 2022 to look like?
Yeah, we actually saw a decrease in eviction filings over 2021. We've seen a decrease over in 2020 and 2021, but we really believe that that's due to 3 interventions. So the 3 interventions are rent assistance that has been available. The CDC moratorium had a huge impact that's been in effect since September. And then also that we are representing more tenants. And so, it sort of has a effect on the entire system. We anticipate that at some point the eviction filings will pick up again, and there'll be a spike in filings, especially as the moratorium comes to an end and as rent assistance begins to run out. But there has been a decrease, and in part also I should mention that there was a period of time where a lot of courts were not accepting eviction filings at all because of the pandemic and the stay-at-home orders, and so we've seen really quite a drop in filings over the last year and a half.
And just one follow-up, if I may, with that. So the way that the landlords, are they made whole, or are they partially made whole, or how does it that we reimburse those landlords so they can continue to pay their property taxes and keep the building up and all that?
So legal aid does not administer the rental assistance, so I would hate to go too far down this path because this would be CHN Housing Partners' area of expertise. We represent the tenant, connect the tenant and therefore the landlord with rental assistance. My understanding is that the funding available to CHN now can both cover back rent and rent going forward.
Right.
Whether it would be making the landlord totally whole in every situation, I don't know. Probably not every situation, but certainly making everyone better off. And that program, again, is incredibly important for the effectiveness of representation also.
Council colleague, I've had a series of conversations with Kevin Nowak, who's the CEO at CHN Housing Partners. They've made a predominance of the landlords whole, who had good documentation and were willing to work with them and submit that documentation on a timely basis. In addition, they are paying some rent forward, and people who have received assistance before are also eligible to come and get it again, if it was for smaller amounts especially. And so this is a way of helping people who are small business owners, in essence, handle their business through what the phrase is pandemic, and it changed how a lot of people who just had small businesses operate. So that was another reason to bring these folks forward today.
Absolutely.
Listening to, and I don't remember who it was on NPR last week. Was that you, Hazel?
Lauren Hamilton, our colleague, and the landlord, who I think it's the same landlord with the quote that we showed.
She was incredibly afraid, and this is, in essence, to folks who are watching us on YouTube today, or if you come and you just glance at it and occasionally check out County Council, calling this helpline or going to CHN Housing Partners website to get information is incredibly important, because sometimes help being kind to someone over the months of the pandemic, our programming can help you out, your small business, your ownership of 3 or 4 houses or a couple of smaller apartment buildings, the tenants who tried but couldn't come up with the full amount, and you feel that your goodwill has been exhausted. It may not be exhausted because the better application of these funds allows for people who are hardworking to receive some additional financial support through this programming. And I think that was a question you had asked a couple of weeks ago.
Yes, it was. I did, and I knew, and thankful for that. Just trying to now compare it and see how it complements what you're doing toward, and you answered that, and thank you, Chair. If I can ask one final question. Under your direct legal services and ripple effect, there's a bullet there that says seeking repair of poor housing conditions at the rental premises. Do you get involved with lead paint in making sure that those families that are there have that protection?
Yes, absolutely. Legal Aid and United Way are both very much involved in the lead paint issues. And raising counterclaims with regard to conditions, particularly lead paint, is one of our priorities at Legal Aid. It's an opportunity for the housing to get fixed, families to be protected, and children to be protected. So we have a number of clients who for whom the conditions are an issue and children have elevated blood lead levels. And this is a great way to address that, and we do.
Okay, good. Thank you, Chair, for the time to ask.
Add one thing to that, to your earlier point, Vice President Stevens, some of the research through the lead work that has been done shows that the vast majority of landlords in our communities are small business owners. They're not the larger management properties that you would see like in Columbus. And so I think that, again, to that point, supporting our small business community, of which predominantly landlords are, is just that much more important. So thank you.
Thank you. My colleague, Mr. Pernell Jones, has a question, sir.
And one, I'd just like to commend you all for your hard work. It's truly needed in the community, and again, I just thank you. Thank you and your entire team. My question is, you mentioned earlier that maybe 1 to 2% of those facing eviction you have been able to help, and that number has since risen to, I believe, 22%. Do you have a target percentage? Is it 100% or is it some other number? And I ask because I had a landlord say to me once that a tenant was leaving, but they by practice tended to file an eviction regardless. So is there an element of eviction that is part of the natural process? And if so, is there a target percentage?
I think in our ideal world, it would be 100%. I mean, if you are facing eviction and the loss of your housing, you should have an attorney represent you in that instance. I mean, the scenario that you just gave where a landlord has the practice of filing an eviction, even though the tenant is already potentially almost out, that eviction filing is really damaging to that family. They now have the Scarlet E on their record, and an attorney can help fix that, can help get a motion to seal the record. They can help the tenant navigate, make sure that they don't end up with a judgment against them or that they don't owe a ton of money at the end. And so really, I think in our ideal world, maybe Colleen will disagree, but it would be 100%. Everyone who's facing eviction should have an attorney represent them.
If for a moment, either Hazel or Colleen, you would talk about the impact of the Scarlet E on a tenant's record and what can potentially happen to them, especially for the folks who need affordable housing.
I mean, really, once that eviction is on the record, there is no ordinance, there's nothing that protects tenants from that being public record. It is public record, even if the tenant won the eviction, even if the case was dismissed or there was some sort of settlement, the actual filing in and of itself has an effect on a tenant's ability to rent going forward. A lot of times landlords will say, no, well, no, I'm not going to rent to you because you've had an eviction on your record, or I'm not going to rent to you because you're in the middle of an eviction, not realizing that just the filing itself doesn't necessarily mean that the person was evicted. And so there are some jurisdictions throughout the county and in Cleveland that have enacted rules that afford the opportunity for tenants to seal their record under certain circumstances. So it's not a blanket, but that is generally done by motion. And so tenants don't always understand how to navigate that process on their own. Even in cases where there isn't a court rule, there are arguments that an attorney can make, such as the equity powers of the court, that would enable a tenant to potentially have access to that motion or that sealing of the record so that it doesn't pose that barrier going forward. But it is a true barrier to housing, and we see that play out all the time.
My last question is, I appreciated your comments about people's items and life being put out on the front lawn, and it just took me back to the foreclosure crisis of 06, 07. Did this exist at that time, or did this birth out of that experience, or was it just not to scale at the time when you know the national need that was there in terms of tenants? Could you speak a little bit to just what you're doing today, what it would look like back then?
Yeah, I think it's such an important analogy, and one of the things that I keep saying to myself is we cannot, as a community, repeat the mistakes we made in the 2008 crisis. And we did a lot as a community to keep people in their houses, but our neighborhoods were devastated as a result of the foreclosure crisis and the eviction crisis. But you're right, the eviction crisis did not get the attention back then that the foreclosure crisis got. And I think that was true nationally. There was a lot of national media, appropriately so, on the foreclosure crisis, in part because of the financial markets engagement in that, and the whole system was broken. But all the while, tenants were being evicted, tenants were being evicted, tenants were being evicted, which absolutely destroys neighborhoods and destroys community. Nationally, you may have read the book Evicted. That, I think, is what sparked America's attention. And when Matthew Desmond in his book says that eviction is not just a symptom of poverty, it is a cause of poverty. So if we can prevent evictions, we prevent families moving into substandard housing, moving into unsafe neighborhoods, the sort of downward spiral that families end up in once they're evicted. So that book, and there was a community read here in Cuyahoga County of that book, and I think it got people's attention. And we realized, you know what? We have a solution to people being thrown out of their homes and neighborhoods being disrupted and people not being able to get to their jobs and their school. We can prevent evictions. And we have this court system, but without access to a lawyer, it's not a justice system. It's just a court system. We can change that by providing attorneys to tenants to enforce their rights. By providing rental assistance, we can stabilize homes. So I'm hopeful that we will do better in our community response this time around than we did in 2008, because we recognize that we're anticipating a foreclosure crisis too, mind you. It hasn't happened yet because of the protections that are out there, but we're gearing up also for that. But not forgetting the tenants, which tend to be lower income people, tend to be people who don't have much in the bank to be able to weather these storms that they're encountering.
I appreciate that. I always said in those years following when we took office that the financial institutions that received those TARP dollars, they were doubly enriched by receiving those dollars and not giving some type of strategic, leniency to those who owed them mortgage. That should have been done. So I thought that would have been a great legal battle right there. So again, I thank you all for your work.
My colleagues and I have no further questions. I want to thank you for coming in today. I also want to thank you for your work and hope that those who are listening spread the word by referring our YouTube link to other folks. And I'm hoping that the courts that you mentioned, Lakewood, Parma, Bedford, Lyndhurst, and Berea, will pick this up and pay attention. Let's give a shout out to those courts, to the staff who work for them, for the elected officials in those cities, that they will hear that their names have been mentioned on courts, not personal, on this recording, not personally, but collectively, and hopefully they will help their constituents reach into this system and get the assistance that they need. If there's nothing else from either one of my colleagues, I move adjournment. Is that accepted?
Accepted.
Okay. Thank you very much for your attendance today. This meeting of the Community Development Committee is adjourned.